They compared water only fasting to regular eating to fasting mimicking, and the fasting mimicking actually was even better than water only fasting in that population. There's actually, again, regeneration of the gut lining with these prolonged fasts.
This is the Home of Healthspan podcast, where we profile health and wellness role models, sharing their stories and the tools, practices, and routines they use to live a lively life. Renee, I am personally very excited for this episode. All things fasting, you know far more about it than I will ever know. And it's a question I've gotten since even before I started Lively. People would come because I had started on the fasting journey. So I'm very much looking forward to what I'm going to learn and what we can share today. But before we do that, how would you describe yourself?
Ooh, I would say that I am a lively, curious people person. That is going to be my little badge that I'm going to give myself. And I think I give it two parts because I couldn't decide between people person, which is a big part of who I am. I've always been incredibly outgoing, energetic in social situations. But there's a big part of me actually that I would say is almost entirely separate from this outgoing people person, which is this curious, problem solver, liking to dig into things. And a lot of the time that ends up being done alone, solo. So I think that those are the two big parts of who I am and make up a lot of what I do and why I've ended up where I've ended up, both in the realm of nutrition and being kind of that curious person there, in the world of entrepreneurship and networking, in the people person side of things, and then bringing it all together into my dietetics profession, where that nutrition and science pairs with supporting people and helping people grow. It all kind of like brings all of those pieces together with a bow on top.
And I mean, this is a really interesting space to be, because there's certain parts on health or wellness and things like smoking. We know, just don't do it, right? It's bad. Exercise. Hey, it's important. Go do it. Nutrition, it's like religion, right? I mean, people have very strong beliefs, but it's not like there's always super, super clear data. So what drew you into this field of nutrition? I mean, I imagine that curiosity was a big part of it, because like, wow, this is a space to learn so much about.
Exactly. And unfortunately, because the world of nutrition is what it is, like you're constantly looking, like you're always learning. I honestly, I don't think we will ever get to a point where we know like this is the one way, because there isn't a one way. We are human beings, each with our own personal needs. And that differentiation between human beings is what keeps us continuously guessing, what is optimal for each individual. So that's part of what drew me were the questions that I had, and the never ending questions that I had. And that's what keeps it kind of fun, but it's also what makes it sometimes very frustrating as well. Yes and no, I guess I should say.
I guess it's a moving target. I saw this pretty funny Instagram video where a lady's like sitting down to eat oatmeal, and then puts up a clip of Dave Asprey being like, it's poison, you can't do this. And it's like, okay, then a clip of her eating eggs, and somebody else being like, oh my God, the only thing wrong with eggs are the whites and the yolks, and here's why they're poison. Like, okay, then meat and the same thing, and then berries. And it was just like, I give up on eating. I just can't have anything. And it's not a blanket rule, right? Like it's not like smoking. I mean, I imagine for an individual, even seasonally, it could change. Times of life, it could change. Whatever's going on, your needs and what you can't have or shouldn't have may change as well. Is that fair to say?
Over the time, I've tried to kind of figure out if there are any kind of religious truths that are relatively stable across all of the different opinions. A lot of the time they are opinions and not even necessarily fact-based or evidence-based, but across most principles of nutrition, there are some through lines. And generally that's that we want to have whole foods, right? I think the vast majority of people can agree that heavily processed foods and ingredients are just not going to serve you. And so that's one thing that I think Like when you can start to find some of these things that align across disciplines, then those are the pieces that you can kind of maybe prioritize over the others. And then the other piece is when there are such huge deltas in opinions. I mean, there's so many of them: plant-based versus carnivore, seed oils versus beef tallow. I mean, like the world, it is so polarizing. And when I see things like that, that's when in those cases, one, I go to the literature. Two, I go to what has fueled me, what has served me. And I also go on like heavily personalized digging into the literature on who was this done on. Was it male, female, elderly, young? Was it in a specific region? What else were these people doing? What was their socioeconomic status? And so that's where you have to start like really looking at some of that personalization. And by the way, this is not even just nutrition. I mean, you look at even exercise, and I think we know, weight-bearing exercise is really, really critical, but there's even some discrepancy in that world because of the differences between age-based exercise, right? So as we get older, yes, we definitely want to potentially over-prioritize weight-bearing exercise. But there's discrepancy there too. And that's because of so many of the changes that happen over the course of life as we have all of these differences in who we are, what makes us up, and our genetics, our environment. The list goes on and on and on. So I guess I hope that somewhat answers your question or adds to the dialogue.
It does. It reminds me, there was an expert recently talking about the ketogenic diet. I forget on which podcast, probably Atia, and was saying there's certain percentages, maybe 20% of people are super responders to it, right? Like it just cures all these symptoms. It makes everything great. There's some percent that it throws off their cholesterol and biomarker and like is super, super problematic. And then you get this mix in the middle. And so how these studies work, you end up with averages, but no one's actually average. And this is the personalization. There was an example, I want to say it was after World War II, where they went to redesign the cockpits of planes. They said, look, we're better fed, we're bigger people. We built these cockpits for people of a certain size. Let's go redesign it. So they go redesign, the height, the width, where the buttons go, everything for the average pilot. And then somebody asked the smart question of, well, how many of these pilots are the average? And they went into the data and there was no one who was average.
Exactly.
Because some people may have longer arms, but shorter torsos and all this. No one was the blended average. Mm-hmm. And so what they learned was they didn't need to redesign a single thing. They needed to design for flexibility. So you could adjust it to the pilot. And I wonder if there's something similar to dietary changes or dietary testing of, okay, how does this make me feel? How does this impact my blood work or other things? Do you see that?
Yes. And there are those things. The problem is that either they're quite expensive or they require a lot of time and investment from our part. There's a lot of food testing that you can do, but generally what you end up having to do is take out a lot of things from your diet and then gradually reintroduce them. And this can take months, and it also takes a lot of introspection and time thinking about checking in with your body. And, a lot of people just don't really want to give themselves the time. There are some tests, of course, we can test and retest various metrics. So for example, if that example that you shared about the ketogenic responders versus non-responders, generally what they're testing there are metrics that are looking at their lipid metrics, triglycerides, et cetera. You need typically at least 3 months pre and post test to really get a sense of whether or not you are a responder or not. And so, if I were to tell you, by the way, I think I can tell you if the ketogenic works for you or not, ketogenic diet works for you or not. But what I need you to do is follow the ketogenic diet perfectly for 3 months. And I'm going to test you and retest you. Like nobody wants to do that, And there are, of course, the hand selected few people like the Peter Attias or the Brian Johnsons who are using themselves as the case study of one and learning what works for them. But then the problem is that the rest of the world is like, oh, that worked for so-and-so, and then trying to apply it to them without doing the work themselves. So yeah, I mean, I guess like as with anything, if you really, really want that hyper personalization, you kind of have to, if you want the best of the best, you have to do the work to get there. And I will leave that up to the listeners to decide if that's who they want to be.
Okay. So we've spent the whole first part talking about food.
Yeah.
And what I promised was we were going to go do a deep dive on the absence of food, on fasting. And so I do want to get to that. One of our very, very first episodes, I want to say like first 5, first 10, we had Abby Langer, a nutritionist on. And when I talked about fasting, she said, well, you have an eating disorder.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Maybe I do. Like, let me see if this is a real thing. But I mean, you work with Dr. Valter Longo, author of The Longevity Diet, L-Nutra, Prolon, the positive benefits that we've seen from fasting. Can you talk about that for a second? Like when we say fasting, what do we mean? Because there's all sorts of different gradations of, is it intermittent daily? Is it certain number of times, days a week? Is it times in a month or a quarter?
Yeah.
So how do you look at it?
Well, first, there's so much to unpack here because I feel like I have to make a comment about Abby, what Abby shared, which, I think a lot of dietitians, and I myself am a registered dietitian. I got my master's degree in Healthspan and longevity nutrition and became a registered dietitian as well. And I can tell you that my community of registered dietitians definitely they have a visceral reaction often with fasting for that specific reason of eating disorders. And that is totally fair, by the way. And so generally, and I want to put this little caveat that we wouldn't recommend serious fasting protocols for individuals with histories of eating disorders. And we specifically use that as an exclusion criteria. And also what we do is that we make sure that people understand why they're doing this. It's not for ultimate thinness. It's for longevity, it's for health span, and it's done in short periods of time for a specific goal and purpose. And as long as somebody understands that, what we've actually seen is improvements in relationships with food and behaviors with food. And so again, this is just another one of those things where we really do have to like kind of unpack things a little bit and not just say like, oh no, this is one way and nothing else. So just a quick aside on that, because I think it's important to talk about, especially as a dietitian who is a big believer in intuitive eating and is very aware of kind of the food, the issues that the food culture has brought to all of us.
Before we move on, can I just make one PSA? Because I think there's certain listeners who might say, oh, not an MD, not a doctor. I want to listen to them. And every doctor I speak to says, no, go talk to someone who's actually trained in nutrition, like a registered dietitian, because we got 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour maybe in all of our 4 years of med school on nutrition. I actually don't know anything about it. Go talk to the person who has a deep knowledge, a deep education in this. And so this is why we're having this conversation and not with someone who got an hour of it in 4 years. Yeah.
Exactly. And by the way, I will give, I spend a lot of time with doctors. In fact, I do a lot of nutrition education training. I probably at this point, thousands of doctors on fasting and fasting mimicking science. And so I want to qualify that there are some doctors out there that have since done the work to get some information, but the vast majority of them have not. And so, definitely take that with a grain of salt and do your due diligence on where, what people have been educated in. But now there's incredible movements like the Academy of Lifestyle Medicine, for example, that are doing post training for physicians on things like nutrition, et cetera. So just look for some of those additional qualifications. But we can derail so fast, but let's come back to fasting. Fasting, yes, it's an umbrella term. It covers a lot of different types of fasting. And believe it or not, even some of these fasting protocols include food. So it is not what you might think. When we look at the definitions of fasting, there's a lot of different ones, and it depends how you're qualifying it. I typically break it up into a few different categories. One is going to be time-based. So how long are you in this quote unquote fasted state? Another one is, what are you including or excluding as part of your fasting protocol? Those are going to be probably the two biggest ones that are going to determine how we are defining fasting. And so if we look at time-based, the big kind of cutoff is 2 days. And people are always surprised when I say 2 days, because when we think about fasting, we usually think about 1 day fasts, right? 16-hour fasts, 24-hour fasts. And those all, including a 2-day fast, would fall within the category of intermittent fasting. And the reason why we set that cutoff of 2 days is because at the 2-day mark, there is an additional kind of big shift that happens when we fast for 3 days or more. And that's something that we call autophagy or deep cellular cleanup. I like to think of it like a vacuum cleaner for our cells. I'm sure many of your listeners who are kind of the optimizers are familiar with autophagy and mitophagy and all of this incredible cellular cleanup. But if you really want to turn that on, there is a misnomer and a misunderstanding that you can do that with intermittent fasting or 24-hour fasting. And unfortunately, you're really not going to like pull the throttle on autophagy until you hit about 3 days of water only or fasting mimicking protocols. So that is category 1. And then category 2 being what you include or what you don't include. Of course, there's water only fasting, which is kind of, I think, what people typically think of as the dictionary definition of fasting. Either you have something or you do not have something. But there's also, there's now, proponents of dry fasting where you don't even have water. And then on the other side of the spectrum is fasting mimicking. And this is really, my bread and butter. This is pretty much what I will recommend to the vast majority of my clients and the people that I work with, because you get to include nutrition. Now, not just, I'm not talking bone broth or juices or electrolytes. We're talking plants. We're talking vegetables. We're talking nuts. We're talking breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and even a little dessert, because there's a little chocolate typically at the end of a fasting mimicking day. So this is real nutrition that you're having while your body is behaving like it is in a fasted state. And so you can see how this would be not just easier, but also safer. And then there's like a handful of other benefits that we see when we engage in fasting mimicking over water only fasting. So that is my very long description of fasting.
Incredibly helpful. We spent the first part talking about why you might not want to, right? If you had some unhealthy relationships with food, et cetera. Could we talk about why you might want to, especially these two different categories? So, especially intermittent fasting, it seems a lot of people use it just because it's the easiest lever for them for caloric restriction. Some people do it with elimination diets and they say, well, I'm only going to eat these foods, and that's how they get the caloric restriction or whatever it is. But other people do intermittent. And then for the 3+ day, there's the autophagy, but I believe there are other, because it's been used for treatments for all sorts of things. I think where Dr. Longo's research started a lot was in conjunction with chemotherapy, because you're starving the cancer cells, helping feed the healthy cells. So can we talk about why you might look at one versus the other, and who would be looking at it?
Yeah. And it's also not necessarily one versus the other. There is worlds where you can do both, because fasting mimicking protocols are generally longer, right? These prolonged fasting mimicking protocols are usually about 5 days. There are also short fasting mimicking protocols, but typically I will recommend longer fasts that are 5 days or so in the fasting mimicking category. And then maybe a intermittent fast as well, but that is water only. But typically in that category, I will say about 12 hours, right? So you can find ways to pair them both, but why would you do one or the other? This is a really important question. Or what are the benefits to one versus the other? Intermittent fasting has benefits that are primarily metabolic and weight loss forward. So especially if I have somebody who is looking to lose weight, is looking for that slightly lower calorie, but also fat burning, because what we see when we go in an intermittent fast, once we hit about 12 hours of fasting, our body has run out of the sugars that we have stored and consumed. And so it has to go look for energy elsewhere. And where does it look? It looks to fat. And so it starts breaking down fat. So fasts of anywhere from 12 plus start to push us into ketosis or fat burning. And so that can be helpful even beyond the calorie restriction component and the calorie balance equation. Also, where we're getting our energy from can be helpful for weight loss. And it can also be helpful because we're learning, our body's learning to switch fuel sources from sugar to fat and back and forth. What we also are helping with is insulin sensitivity and blood sugar management and things like that. So people who have some of, maybe prediabetes or even type 2 diabetes, these can be some solutions that we look at there. So that's intermittent fasting benefits. Now, when we go into prolonged fasting, it's not that those are gone, because those remain, but that we tack on additional benefits. And they primarily come from that deep cellular cleanup known as autophagy. But the reason why I'm going to list a very large number of benefits in a second is because our cells make up our entire body. And so if we are doing deep cellular cleanup, we're not just helping one system or one mechanism, we're doing a lot. And not to mention, we're now starting to see some activation of new cells, including stem cell activation with these longer fasts as well. And I have some cool studies that just came out, even in humans, that are starting to point to some of this too, showing regeneration of the ability to taste and smell that has been lost with prolonged fasting, and specifically fasting mimicking. But some of the more, I guess, exciting for the general public are going to be things like improvements in biological age metrics, which, by the way, is a aggregation of a large number of metrics. Improvements in skin health, improvements, of course, in your metabolic health. So these are a number, again, of different metrics, from blood sugar management to insulin sensitivity, to blood pressure, to cholesterol, to triglycerides, pretty much anything that your doctor is measuring when you go in. We also see some of these cellular benefits and granted, I'm going to list a couple of more preclinical things. For example, there's now been studies in Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, other autoimmune conditions, type 1 diabetes. Those ones are going to be some of our preclinical trials. But now we have some human trials, even in IBD. So these are things like Crohn's and colitis. Now, there's actually, again, regeneration of the gut lining with these prolonged fasts that you don't even see. They did this. This was a cool one where they compared water-only fasting to regular eating to fasting mimicking, and the fasting mimicking actually was even better than water-only fasting in that population. So, anyways, all to say that there's a lot of benefits.
Like inflammation, I hear, and when I feel you may have some niggling knee or joint or something, and after a day or two, you're like, wow, I feel much better. That's gone away. Can you measure that? So you have that kind of subjective feeling, but do you see in C-reactive protein or something like that you can see that changing?
We do, yeah. And so typically what you see with C-reactive protein, at least with the fasting mimicking examples, is we see that when it is elevated, it will improve. When it is already at a generally healthy state, it doesn't go lower. And this is actually something that we see across most, if not all, metrics with fasting and fasting mimicking for prolonged periods of time. Because what you're doing, instead of hacking the system with a medication where, like, for example, if somebody with healthy blood pressure or blood sugar takes a blood pressure or blood sugar medication, they're going to drop to unsafe low levels. But when we go into fasting mimicking, we're letting our body do the work. We're letting our body be the incredible scientist and doctor that it is. And it's not going to let us get into an unsafe territory. It's going to have these safeguards. So if you're already at a healthy level for blood pressure and blood sugar, but your inflammation is through the roof, your body is going to be improving that metric. And that's what's super cool. When we look at the data across a large number of people, we see different things come down. So in some of the research that you look at with fasting mimicking, they do something called a post hoc analysis, where they look at specific groups where they're like, okay, instead of trying to do this average, coming back to kind of one of our earlier conversations, right? Instead of just doing this average where we're going to kind of see things like even out, let's just pull this group of people that have high blood pressure and see what happened there. Let's go pull the people that have, high hepatic fat and see what happened there. And what's cool is that you see, for example, in the hepatic fat example, individuals with the highest hepatic fat fraction drop 50% even with just 3 cycles. Insane. And then people who are already fine, they stay stable. And so this is just like, I think one of the coolest things about letting, taking some of these interventions that are less hacky and more just, natural to do the work.
Most corporate wellness programs overwhelm employees with too much, or they offer too little to be useful. Lively gets it right. We start with each employee's data and goals, then serve one clear, personalized action at a time. No noise, just real behavioral change. The outcome? A healthier, happier workforce and measurable impact for your business. Visit alively.com to see personalized wellness in action.
May I ask a little more on autophagy? Because I think how I first came across Prolon back in 2018 or 2019, I think there was an article in Inc. magazine and it was talking about autophagy. And, I had a history, family with some cancer. It's like, oh, like this sounds super important. Let me go do this. And that kind of kicked off. I've been doing this for 6-7 years now, but we can't really measure it, right? So we're just kind of going on faith, or can we measure it?
We can measure it now, actually. This is a study was actually just published, I think maybe 1 week ago. We're super in.
Wow, okay, great timing.
Yeah, amazing timing. A study was just published about a week ago on fasting mimicking and autophagy, for example, because we can now measure it. Now, it is like many things, by the way, what we're measuring something that's happening in the body that has been associated with autophagy. And so we're looking at a ratio of specific proteins that are either pre-autophagy or post-autophagy. I'm going to butcher this, but I believe it's IC3-2 versus IC3-3. But don't quote me on that. It's something along those lines. But that's the ratio that we're measuring. And we're typically measuring it in one system. So for example, in blood, because again, autophagy can happen in any cells across the body. So we use this as a measure of autophagy. And this is now generally considered to be the gold standard measure of autophagy in humans. And so yeah, it's difficult to measure. Is it something that right now we have a test that you can take at home and be like, I'm in autophagy? No. And that's why it's critical that if you are trying to activate autophagy, you are not trusting these brands that are going out. I've seen it now on a couple of supplements that are like, take this supplement and autophagy will be turned on. I'm like, oh, please, no, that's highly unlikely. And until you show me through at least one of these tests that you can do, like in partnership with a university, until you do that, I refuse to believe it, because autophagy is incredibly difficult to turn on and activate and optimize. So yeah, but you can measure it.
Okay, so on that, I'm really, really curious, because before I think it was we saw it in rats. Like we were able to test it, but we'd probably have to kill the rats to kind of figure it out. And what I kept hearing was they would go on a fast that seemed short, like a 24-hour fast is like a 2-week fast for us, and they would lose 20% of their body weight. And what that actually meant for us and are their downstream negative effects from severe caloric restriction for sarcopenia or osteoporosis, other things for this study. And I certainly want to read it. Now, can you see when it kicks in? Because they're saying, hey, do we need to fast for 2 weeks? It's like, oh, no, at day 3, we kind of see this. And at day 4, we see this. And at day 5, we see this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll share it with you so you can throw it in the show
show
notes so
for
that,
sure.
so that people can check it out. But what we see is that it's statistically significantly elevated on day 3 and 4, primarily on day 4, actually. That's when it's statistically significant. But, it is gradually increasing from around that day after the day 2 mark, which is what we had always kind of suggested and expected, gradually increasing, statistically significant on day 4. What I thought was really interesting was they also measured it on day 7. Now, day 7 is, of course, once you've already started refeeding, because in these protocols, they're 5-day fasting mimicking protocols. On day 7, they retested, and again, was not statistically significantly elevated, but was still elevated. And so again, it points to what a lot of people who talk about autophagy will describe it as kind of this dimmer switch, right? Where it will start at this baseline. It's always kind of happening. Your body's not going to let you just overrun with trash, it's always kind of happening. But then what we see is that when we start in these fasted states, it's kind of like a broken dimmer switch. It doesn't really do too much for a little while. And then all of a sudden it starts gradually increasing over time. And then it gets to the peak. There's only, so much that it can really go. It's not just going to keep increasing forever. Then once you resume eating, it gradually comes back down, but it doesn't just drop immediately. It gradually comes back down. And so there is still some remaining benefits even after you resume regular eating.
Can we talk a little bit about the mindset or kind of mindset impact, benefits, however you want to describe it, of fasting? And this may be just me trying to justify my own thinking on it. So push back if I'm wrong, but on the saying it's an eating disorder with the fasting and people saying, oh, you have an unhealthy relationship with food. I tend to disagree. I say, look, I think society has a really unhealthy relationship with food and the cravings and what you get and feeling, oh, I've been eaten in an hour and so I'm hangry. And there's this whole mindset around that. Whereas for me, starting to do fasting, realize, oh, wait, a lot of this is psychological. Like my body doesn't actually need to eat with that frequency. I'm actually mentally clearer when I'm not. I have more energy when I'm not. And so instead of being trained on the signals from ads for McDonald's or Dairy Queen on TV, I can listen to my body of, oh no, I really do need to eat now, or this is really what I'm craving and want, versus maybe this is the bad gut microbiota saying, no, go eat a bunch of sugar right now because you need to feed me. And so do you see that actually get people to a healthier relationship with food? Because I don't know. For me, it's almost freeing. If you had to miss a meal, if something's going on, like, oh, okay, I can do this. Like it's not the end of the world. I'll just eat a little later. Right? It's fine.
Exactly. And you hit the nail on the head. And in fact, this has been studied. There's been surveys done with individuals who have completed 5-day fasting mimicking protocols. Granted, I'm going to speak specifically to fasting mimicking because that's where the study was done. And we see that over 80% of people report a better relationship with food, less sugar cravings, all of these, adjustments in their relationship with food. And we can't say for certain why this happens, right? Because it is kind of a subjective assessment. But as you experienced, I have done, a fasting mimicking protocol about 16 times now. I can tell you from my personal experience that what you're doing over the course of a 5-day fasting mimicking protocol is really connecting internally, thinking about, wow, I just went to the kitchen for the 3rd time today. For what? Like, I don't even need anything. Like, it was just like this thing. And then, or like you just have one of your lunch soups and then you're immediately thinking about something else that you could have, even though you just ate. And it's like, because you are in this protocol for that 5-day period, you're constantly checking in and you realize how frequently our brain and our mind is consumed with these thoughts around food and nutrition. And so just even that awareness of that piece, and also the important coming back to regular nutrition come day 6, that combination of those two pieces side by side is really, really powerful. Now, another thing that's really powerful about these 5-day fasting mimicking protocols is that they are 5 days and there's a completion and therefore there is a celebration. And that celebration, that victory, that moment of pride is also incredibly motivational for people to start thinking about other things that they can do to make themselves feel good like this, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is actually something that was studied. There was a really cool clinical trial that was published probably about 6 months ago now. They found in individuals with type 2 diabetes who had completed about 12 cycles of fasting mimicking over the course of a year, compared to people with type 2 diabetes that had done healthy nutrition, right? So they're doing everyday healthy nutrition for that same period of time. The group that did the fasting mimicking without being prompted, self-initiated, an additional 4 hours of physical activity a week. And the group that did the everyday healthy nutrition change actually decreased their physical activity by 6 hours a week. And when we look at that, we're like, what? How did this happen, right? The researchers suggest that it is a combination of things. One being that individuals who are doing the fasting mimicking feel lighter and stronger, because we know that with fasting mimicking, muscle is being protected. This is a really important qualifier of fasting mimicking over water-only fasting, for example. But also what we see in everyday calorie restrictive diets, especially when they're protein deficient, which oftentimes happens in calorie restricted programs, and especially when they're not paired with muscle and weight bearing exercise, people lose muscle. So sure, maybe they feel lighter, which they did. The regular nutrition diet did lose weight, but they did not protect muscle like the fasting mimicking group. So lighter, stronger is a big part. Completion with a 5-day program. Yay, I did it. Motivated. Unlike every single day going and being like, I guess I have to have this salad again. I guess I have to do this again. Like, I don't even want to think about anything else that I could do, right? So the 5-day component of it is a really big one. It leaves 25 other days to be like, what else can I do? And so all of those things kind of combined really are what we assume are these really big motivators to make other changes, even outside of nutrition alone. But we know that even in the nutrition realm, there's also other changes being made just naturally and intrinsically uninitiated.
Yeah, that's really intriguing. It reminds me, Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit. Mm-hmm. He talked about he had gotten in this habit in the afternoon of eating a cookie, and he saw his waistline changing. And he's like, well, I'm writing this on habits. Like, maybe this isn't the best habit. What should I do? And he realized it was just like this lull that he kind of got bored. And so he would just walk around the office and go start a conversation, and that plugged the hole. So it wasn't he was hungry. It wasn't he needed the calories, his brain. It was just, I was bored, and that's what we filled. And I think for a lot of people, especially if you grew up before smartphones and social media, the fear of boredom, it got filled by, okay, I'll go grab something from the kitchen. Now I think a lot of people just pick up their phone and they put junk into their mind instead of their body.
Or both at the same time. That's a big problem that we're facing today, is that we are constantly mindlessly eating. And so we're highly over consuming because we're never checking in.
I mean, and like Thich Nhat Hanh, that's the whole thing. If you're eating a peach, just eat the peach, right? Like, just be there. And the mindless eating, I can go on a whole right? I wrote a whole book on this, but the idea of presence, this is our only life. And so please be there while you're eating this gift of whether an animal sacrificed its life or these plants that were grown from the energy of the sun. Like, enjoy it and appreciate it and sit with that. And I know I'm not always good at it, but
it's hard. It's shockingly difficult. I'm sure in your writing of mindfulness, you spent some time looking at the intuitive eating principles and the kind of foundation that they've built there. But it is, in my opinion, I have tried pretty much every single diet that there is. I'm a tester. I use myself as a case study of one all of the time. So I've tried them all. And the hardest one, honestly, was intuitive eating, and just like truly being free, letting yourself have whatever you want, but having to check in, stop, check in before, during, and after every single meal, uninterrupted. That was the hardest one.
It's sitting with our own thoughts. It's a difficult task, but it's a journey of life. Well, Renee, this has been amazing. I have certainly learned a lot. I hope our listeners did as well. This is a topic as you touched on, like this study just came out last week.
Yeah.
We'll need to stay in touch and bring in more as we learn more.
Yeah.
But thank you. Before we sign off, where can listeners learn more about you, what you're doing with L-Nutra and Prolon, all the things?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're interested to connect with me, check me out on Instagram, probably the fastest way to connect with me these days, at Fitton Nutrition. That's Fitton Nutrition. If you're curious to do fasting mimicking in the easiest way possible, there are pre-made 5-day kits that will bring you everything that you need for that 5-day period. They are through Prolon or another company called L-Nutra Health. Prolon, check them out at Prolon Life, PROLON life.com. And L-Nutra is more of the medical division. Let's say you have type 2 diabetes, for example, metabolic syndrome, you want physician oversight. They have that. So L-Nutra health.com.
And if I could do a little plug on both of those, I mean, these aren't fly-by-night businesses. These are built up by Dr. Valter Longo based on the research he's seen in supporting cancer patients on chemo and everything with these. And as I understand it, the profits are used to fund more research in this area as well. Is all that fair to say?
All of that is very fair to say. A large number of the profits go actually to 2 different verticals. One to USC, which is the kind of research vertical, the University of Southern California. Also to a nonprofit called Create Cures, which is using fasting mimicking protocols in individuals with severe or late stage conditions, including cancer, but also severe autoimmune, among others, and leveraging these tools in those individuals with dietitian support, biochemists, all the wonderful support there. So those are 2 additional avenues where those profits will go. But yes, as you mentioned, I'll call it out because it deserves to be said. Prolon was founded, yes, by Dr. Valter Longo, and founded off of about 30 years of research, about $40 million in NIH funding of that research. There are now over 47 clinical trials with this specific protocol in fasting mimicking alone, 100 patents. I mean, this is really heavily science backed, and something that, you know, in a world where, as we kind of started off with, it's hard to know what to trust. I think this is one of those few protocols where we do have so much research and so much support to guide us in the right direction across so many different verticals too.
Yeah, and one other last thing, if you love the data, obviously what Renee said, there's a ton of data there. If you love the stories, I think the Facebook community, there's some really good stories of people sharing as they go on their journey, and here's round number 1 and what it's done for their lives. So it's a great story that has both, that I would just say.
The number of testimonials that have brought tears to my eyes are like pretty significant. So it's amazing. And I hope that if your listeners are curious, all you have to do is commit 5 days. I mean, you can do anything for 5 days, especially when it's fully delivered to your door, made easy. I mean, just give it a shot. And I think you'll be quite surprised at what you see.
And once you do, I think you'll expand the universe of what you think you can do. It will give you a level of confidence after that first one. I've just seen it over and over. Yeah. Well, Renee, this has been incredible. Thank you. I could just keep going, but I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Such a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Home of Healthspan podcast. And remember, you can always find the products, practices, and routines mentioned by today's guests, as well as many other Healthspan role models on alively.com. Enjoy a lively day.